ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकाय चक्षुरुन्मिलितमेन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टां स्थापितमेन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरुं श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरुन् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगण रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं राधाकृष्णपादान् सहगण ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कान्त राधाकान्त नमोऽस्तुते। तप्ता काञ्चन गौरंगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभो नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवास आदि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। नमो नमो अनिरुद्धाय ऋषिकेशेन्द्रियात्मने, नमः परमहंसाय पूर्णाय निवृत्तात्मने, स्वर्गपवर्गद्वाराय नित्यं शुचिसदे नमः। नमः हिरण्यवीर्याय चातुर्होत्राय तान्तवे। Hare Krishna. Thank you for joining us. We are continuing a discussion of Srimad Bhagavatam. In the previous week's session, we concluded the 12th chapter of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, and the subject matter of the 12th chapter was the birth of Maharaj Parikshit. So, in essence, the 11th chapter described the entry of Krishna into Dwaraka. And even though the birth of Parikshit takes place prior to his leaving for Dwaraka, the birth of Parikshit itself is a matter of conversation. It is brought forth in the subsequent chapter in wanting to describe how great Krishna was, and just wanting to reiterate the mood of the devotees of Dwaraka so that we are all fully aware of what is the mood of the devotees who are present in Dwaraka, their own anxieties in separation, and then being able to show the nature of the Pandavas and the extraordinarily great benefit, or rather the great blessing which Sri Parikshit Maharaj received from Krishna himself, the protection of the Supreme Lord. So, by looking at the reception given to Krishna, and then coming to understand the greatness of Parikshit Maharaj, we are able to better appreciate his position in terms of the proximity of the Pandavas and the position of Parikshit Maharaj to the Supreme Lord. And then subsequently, after the departure of Krishna to Dwaraka, you then have a situation of Yudhishthir Maharaj and his family members being in very deep separation from Krishna. And that separation is somewhat alleviated when Mahatma Vidura returns from his Tirtha Yatra. He does not want to participate in the war, neither does he want to take sides in any manner. He simply goes away on a pilgrimage at the beginning of the war, and that allows him the association of sage Maitreya Muni. And after receiving the association of Maitreya Muni, and after developing very deep transcendental insight and transcendental knowledge, Sri Vidura, Mahatma Vidur, he returns back to Hastinapur, and he is received with great honor. He is also received with great affection, and everybody is completely elated by his presence because he's a pure devotee, and his presence is extraordinarily beneficial because his presence practically drives away ignorance. He is a sadhu, so his sangha is so very powerful that everybody becomes extraordinarily happy on his return to Hastinapur, where they give him all facilities so that he is able to rest, and he is sumptuously fed. And then a conversation begins between him and his older brother Dhritarashtra. And in that conversation, Sri Vidura very specifically is described as someone who is younger than Dhritarashtra. He is also a Shudra by birth, because his mother is a Shudra, while his father is the same personality as Dhritarashtra and Pandu, Srila Vyasadeva. So his mother is a Shudra. So as in that sense, he takes on the mood of his mother. In other words, he always acknowledges his position, and he's very sensitive, socially very sensitive, in terms of understanding what is appropriate and what is not appropriate in terms of behavior. So here the context is being brought forward that there are two disqualifications. One is Dhritarashtra is older, Vidura, Sri Mahatma Vidura, is younger. The second disqualification is by birth Mahatma Vidura is a Shudra. So then the question comes as to who is qualified to be a guru, who is qualified to be a spiritual master. And then here the reference of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where whoever is Krishna conscious is qualified to be a spiritual master, where there is absolutely no distinction whatsoever in terms of birth, in which family a person is born, whether the person even by occupation is a Shudra or a Brahmana or a Kshatriya or a Vaishya, by occupation. We are not even talking birth, we are talking occupation. If such a person is completely Krishna conscious, then he does develop the authority to become a spiritual master, because by his contact, one is able to receive the highest benefit. So it's not so much of a material designation. So here the distinction is being brought forth in terms of who is qualified and is he qualified. So we're also going to read about the arguments given there in terms of why he is qualified. Most importantly, Sri Mahatma Vidur is a Mahajan. Right? He is one of the Mahajanas, and as a consequence, he is an authority, and his business is to propagate Krishna consciousness. His business is to be able to instill faith and to be able to cultivate faith and to drive away, dispel ignorance. That is his interest, and that is exactly what the duties of the Mahajanas are. Right? So, in that sense, he is fully qualified because he is completely Krishna conscious. So that is the argument which is being brought forth. Then you have this extraordinarily interesting dialogue between Sri Vidura and Dhritarashtra, where Sri Vidura inspires Dhritarashtra to renounce and go into the forest. He gives him several reasons. Okay, so we're going to be looking at all those several reasons. We're going to understand the qualities required for one to be fixed in Krishna consciousness. What is it which is required for one to be fixed in Krishna consciousness? We have discussed the qualities many a time. You see, the fundamental quality which is required is for one to be in the mode of goodness, at the very least. By being in the mode of goodness, one can use the mode of goodness as an effective platform for us to become fixed in our sadhana, fixed in our service. And the greatest quality of the mode of goodness is that one becomes detached. One has the ability to give up attachment to their surroundings. One has the ability to tolerate. So the concept of tolerance and being able to give up attachment to the surroundings is not possible in the lower modes of passion and ignorance. So the mode of goodness is the pre-qualification for one to be able to proceed further. So every spiritual path, practically, if it is connected to the Vedic paradigm, they have complete understanding of the fact that one has to transcend and reach the point of goodness. You have to be sattvic for you to function. Now, beyond sattva lies Shuddha sattva. The material mode of goodness, or being sattvic in the material mode, is also material, and it has certain difficulties. The difficulties of being material or being in the mode of goodness, even though it is superior to passion, superior to ignorance, and offers an adequate platform for us to be able to move forward and make advancement, the material mode of goodness causes attachment, in one sense, to a sense of happiness. People become complacent because they feel very happy, you see. And that is a difficulty with the material mode of goodness. So it is not so much that we pursue spiritual life for the purpose of peace. The mode of goodness provides us the platform because peace is required so that we could consolidate our practices and we could make advancement. When two nations are at war, peace is desired. Without peace, there can be no building, there can be no nation building. Why is it required? Because you cannot have the population under anxiety. You cannot have the population under fear, excessive fear, and also expect that they can be productive, because excessive fear is a symptom of mode of ignorance. You cannot be productive, you cannot really be building nations when there's such deep-rooted mode of ignorance, tamasic reactions in the minds. So in that sense, you can't do anything in a situation of war. There has to be peace. Similarly, even for a sadhaka, there has to be the mode of goodness, because by having a peaceful surrounding, one then can put their energies into being able to absorb themselves in the holy names. So it's a prerequisite. But there is a certain challenge in the prerequisite, is that people become happy. And sometimes in that particular happiness, one forgets that they have to move forward. You could become complacent, as they say. So that whole idea of greed, laulyam, which is required for progress in spiritual life, it could be slightly thwarted unless the person is very, very cognizant and in touch with Shastra. Because when you come in touch with Shastra, Shastra awakens your desire to experience Shastra. You see, if someone is very sincere in reading Shastra, it is not so much of just reading Shastra. You want to experience Shastra. You want to go into it so that you understand how you can also experience what others experience in Shastra. That is the purpose of reading Shastra, is to practically set us up for future experiences. It gives us knowledge, saying, okay, if you do this, you're going to experience this. It gives us knowledge. And it also tells us how we need to situate ourselves so that we can experience something. So we practically need to adjust our lifestyles. We need to adjust ourselves in the manner of being able to progress further. And that is what Shastric reading does. And that is the purpose of Shastric reading. It is not a matter of scholarship. It is not a matter of simply wanting to display knowledge and say that I know this and I know that. That's useless in one sense if we can't really apply it and we don't desire to live it. Living Shastra, on the other hand, is to have complete realization. And when one realizes Shastra, they are able to live it. Otherwise, one is in the theoretical platform. So coming back to our topic, there is a discussion in this chapter of what is it which is required for one to become fixed. The word used is dhira. Dhira is to become fixed. Dhira is to become fixed in the determination, to become resolute, and for you to be able to move forward. What is it which is required? So as a pre-qualification, the mode of goodness is being described. Okay? As a pre-qualification. That will motivate one. So that is a very, very important aspect of it. Okay? So now we're going to be looking at a description of all the events which I just described. And we're going to go deeper into the crux of the topic today, which is how does one become fixed? What is the definition of dhira? There is a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, which we will be going into after a few verses in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And that verse in the Bhagavad Gita is tied in to this specific topic. Okay? So let's start with Srimad Bhagavatam, then we go into Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 13, first canto. Sutta uvacha vidurastirthayatrayam maitreyad atmanogatim gyatva gadastinapuram tevapta vivitsitaha. Sri Sutta Goswami said, while traveling on a pilgrimage, Vidura received knowledge of the destination of the self from the great sage Maitreya and then returned to Hastinapura. He became as well versed in the subject as he desired. As well versed as he desired. It's an interesting statement. So, text 2. Yavatah kratavan prashnan shat kausaravagrataha jataika bhaktir govinde tebyas chopararamaha. After asking various questions and becoming established in transcendental loving service of Lord Krishna, Vidura retired from putting questions to Maitreya Muni. Tvam bandhum agatam drishtva dharmaputrah sahanujah dhritarashtro yutsascha sutah saradvatah prata Gandhari Draupadi Brahman Subhadra Chotara Kripi Anyascha Janmayah Pandor Gyatyah Sashutah Striyah. When they saw Vidura return to the palace, all the inhabitants, Maharaj Yudhishthira, his younger brothers, Dhritarashtra, Satyaki, Sanjaya, Kripacharya, Kunti, Gandhari, Draupadi, Subhadra, Uttara, Kripi, many other wives of the Kauravas and other ladies with children, all hurried to him in great delight. It so appeared that they had regained their consciousness after a long period. Pratyujjagmuhu prahechena pranam tanvaivaagatam abhishan gamya vidhivat parishvan gabivadanaihi. With great delight, they all approached him as if life had returned to their bodies. They exchanged obeisances and welcomed each other with embraces. Mumuchuh prema baspogam virahautkantyah kataraha rajatam adhyayam chakre kritasana parigraham. Due to anxieties and long separation, they all cried out of affection. King Yudhishthira then arranged to offer sitting accommodations and a reception. Tam bhuktvantam vishrantam asinam sukham asane prasyaravarnato raja prahatesham chashinvatam. After Vidura ate sumptuously and took sufficient rest, he was comfortably seated. Then the king began to speak to him, and all who were present there listened. Yudhishthiro vacha apismarata no yusmad pakshachaya sameditan vipadgrana visagyadir mochitayat samartakaha. Maharaj Yudhishthira said, "My uncle, do you remember how you always protected us, along with our mother, from all sorts of calamities? Your partiality, like the wings of a bird, saved us from poisoning and arson. Kaya vrityavartitam vas charadbhih mandalam tirthani kshetramukyani sevitani bhutale." While traveling on the surface of the earth, how did you maintain your livelihood? At which holy places and pilgrimage sites did you render service? Bhavad vida bhagavatas tirthabhutaham swayam vibho tirti kurvanti tirtani swanta stena gadabrata. My Lord, devotees like your good self are verily holy places personified. Because you carry this personality of Godhead within your heart, you turn all places into places of pilgrimage. It is said that we don't have the qualification to observe the transcendental qualities of the places of pilgrimage. We don't have the qualification because we don't have the eyesight, especially these days, because it's all completely covered over. When you visit Sri Vrindavan Dham, when you visit Sri Mayapur Dham, you find that material energy has practically overcome the spiritual planet of both Vrindavan and Mayapur in many, many ways, and Jagannath Puri and so many other places where it has completely overcome. Material energy has covered over. So there is a little bit of a distinction. And the distinction is that material energy covers over the Dham with a very thin film of covering. The spiritual potency still lies completely potent within those places. That particular covering of material energy has to be removed by a sadhu. So when we go to a dham, it is to be for the purpose of associating with a sadhu, because a sadhu has the ability to remove that material covering and disclose the dham to the recipient, the fortunate recipient. So it is said that the dham seva that we do, it is not seen through the eyes, it is seen through the ears. So when we go for parikrama, it is very essential to accompany sadhus who have deep realization of the potency of the Dham, because they have the ability to connect to the Dham, they have the ability to connect to the pastimes, they have the ability to see the pastimes occur, and they in turn would be able to turn around and then describe the pastime to us, and then we would be able to lend our ears and then see through our ears, not through the eyes. So this is exactly a situation that you go to a dham, and if you don't go and receive instructions in the dham from a sadhu, then that particular visit in itself is not considered to be so fortunate. Text 11. Apinah suhradastat bandavah krishna devataha drishtaha shrutava yadavah sapuryam sukham asate. My uncle, you must have visited Dwaraka. In that holy place are our friends and well-wishers, the descendants of Yadu, who are always wrapped in the service of Lord Sri Krishna. You might have seen them or heard about them. Are they all living happily in their abodes? Ityukto dharmarajena sarvam tat samavarnayat yatanubhutam kramasho vinayadu kulakchayam. Thus being questioned by Maharaj Yudhishthira, Mahatma Vidura gradually described everything he had personally experienced except news of the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty. Nanva priyam durvisaham nanam swayam upastitam navadayet sakaruno dukitan drashtum akshamaham. Compassionate Mahatma Vidur could not stand to see the Pandavas distressed at any time. Therefore, he did not disclose this unpalatable and unbearable incident, because calamities come of their own accord. Kanchit kalam atavatsit satkrito devavat sukham bhratru jeshtasya drashyaskrit sarvesham sukham avahan. Thus Mahatma Vidura, being treated just like a godly person by his kinsmen, remained there for a certain period just to rectify the mentality of his eldest brother, and in this way bring happiness to all the others. Abhibrad Aryamadandam Yatavat Agakarishu Yavad Dadara Shudratvam Sapad Varshashatam Yamaha. As long as Vidura played the part of a Shudra, being cursed by Manduka Muni, Aryama officiated at the post of Yamaraja to punish those who committed sinful acts. So, this is a verse which is practically describing the original position of Sri Vidura. Mahatma Vidura is none other than Sri Yamaraja, right? Yamadharma, Dharmaraj himself. So he practically appears to assist the Pandavas and to serve the Supreme Lord when he manifests his pastimes as Krishna. Yamaraj appears. Now, how does he appear? How can a highly stationed personality such as Yamaraj, who is one of the Dikpalakas, who is one of the primary demigods, how can he give up his position and then come down and take the rupa or the body of a Shudra? And how can he offer such, so what is the situation which brings Yamaraj down? So this particular verse practically talks about a curse of Manduka Muni, on whom, because of which Sri Vidura is forced to appear as a Shudra. Sri Yamaraj is forced to appear as a Shudra and as Vidur. Now, just to give a very short description, this Manduka Muni is a personality who is apparently unjustly punished by a king and his soldiers because some thieves are hiding in the ashram, and then he is captured along with the thieves in his own ashram, even though he had absolutely nothing to do with those thieves. He is captured and he is punished. He is lanced. You see, he is killed with a spear. He is punished with a spear, actually. So at that point in time, the question which is being raised by Manduka Muni is that I am completely innocent in the sense that I have engaged in tapasya, I have engaged in austerity throughout my life, I've engaged in so many different pious activities. And why is it that I'm being punished in this manner? what kind of karmic reaction did I carry, or what activity did I perform, which is begetting me this particular heavy punishment that I have to suffer in this manner? So this is a question being posed to Yamaraj. So the answer given by Sri Yamaraj is the fact that while Mandukya Muni was a very young child, he, out of sheer ignorance, or rather you can say, sometimes children can be very cruel because of ignorance and because of various reasons. Because of such an attitude, he took out, or rather he took a very sharp object and he killed an ant with it. He was killing insects. So since he was killing insects with a very sharp object, that particular karmic reaction was the reason for him to suffer such a fate. So Mandukya Muni practically gets enraged because he feels that the level of knowledge that he had as a child was very less, and it was performed out of ignorance because his intelligence was not fully developed. So how could he be punished for that in the same manner as he did to those innocent insects and so on and so forth? So he punishes and he practically curses Yamaraj to descend into this earth as a Shudra. Someone who is so highly stationed, Yamaraj, is now being cursed as a Shudra, cursed to become a Shudra. Now, this is actually the benediction of the Supreme Lord, because this allows the Mahajana, Yamaraj, who wants association, to appear during Krishna's pastimes on the planet, and then to be able to render service to the pure devotees, to be able to render service to Krishna, and to be able to also engage in, katha and engage in pursuing transcendental subject matter, and to distribute such a knowledge in such a wonderful way. So this is actually nothing but mercy, but this verse is talking about him being cursed. There's also mention that Aryama officiated as the post of Yamaraj. Aryama is one of the Adityas. You see, he's one of the 12 Adityas, and he is particularly given this position. So we understand that the service of Yamaraj itself is a position. So it is being replaced by Aryama, who takes over the position because Yamaraj has now incarnated as a Shudra, as Vidura the Shudra. Yudhishthro labdha rajyo dashtva pautram kulandaram brata bratradvir lokapalabir mude parayasriya. Having won his kingdom and observed the birth of one grandson, competent to continue the noble tradition of his family, Maharaj Yudhishthira reigned peacefully and enjoyed uncommon opulence in cooperation with his younger brothers, who are all expert administrators to the common people. Evam griheshu shaktanam pramattanam tadihaya atyakramada vigyatah kalaha paramadustaraha. Insurmountable eternal time imperceptibly overcomes those who are too much attached to family affairs and are always engrossed in their thought. Insurmountable eternal time imperceptibly overcomes those who are too much attached to family affairs and are always engrossed in their thought. Vidurastad abhipretya dadrashtram abhasat rajan nirgam yatam sigram pasyedam bayam agatam. Mahatma Vidura knew all this, and therefore he addressed Dhritarashtra saying, "My dear king, please get out of here immediately, do not delay. Just see how fear has overtaken you." Pratikriyana yasyeha kutaschit karyachit prabho saesha bhagavan kalaha sarvesham nah samagatah. This frightful situation cannot be remedied by any person in this material world. My Lord, it is the Supreme Personality of Godhead as eternal time that has approached us all. Ena chaivabipannoyam pranaihi priyatamair api janah sadhyo viyujyeta kimutanyayar danadibihi. Whoever is under the influence of Supreme Kala, eternal time, must surrender his most dear life, what to speak of other things such as wealth, honor, children, land, and home. Whoever is under the influence of supreme time. Srila Prabhupada, we notice it also. There are several examples that the time factor, in order for the time factor to act upon the karmic reactions of the population, the effect of the time factor on the population is extraordinarily severe. We notice that especially in terms of calamities, global calamities, such as the World War, for instance. Incredible amount of lives were lost, and in the process of the war extending across continents, there were many people who were very extraordinarily displaced. I remember working. I had a colleague of mine who was from Europe, and he was Russian, actually, but he's settled down in America for perhaps for a very, very long time. He was Russian, and he used to tell me, he was a very senior person in terms of his age, and he used to tell me that he didn't know the whereabouts of his father. During the World War II, the family was separated from the father. And till this day, 40 years hence, 50 years hence, he didn't know where his father was because his father was lost. He didn't know whether he was dead. He didn't know if he was alive. He was in some other part of the world. Was he captured? We really do not know. So in other words, it's a reality which Shastra is describing, that the eternal force of time is so powerful that it can completely separate families. It can completely, cause destruction to such an extent that it can cause unimaginable destruction. People can get separated by wealth. They can get separated from their families. Their entire livelihood can be completely smashed down. All of this is a part of the eternal feature of time, eternal time. You see, we see this in India, for instance, when there was the partition of India and Pakistan during the time of independence. And during the partition, so many people on either side of the country had to run. They had to flee, or rather, they chose to leave. And there were many, many people who practically were forced to abandon their houses, abandon their livelihood, abandon wealth. In some cases, the mothers, it is said, who were coming from Pakistan when the border was being closed, and they were making this journey, there were many mothers who could not even carry their babies because they were themselves so exhausted that the babies themselves were abandoned. It was a very tragic story, very, very tragic occurrence even in Indian history of the partition of India with Pakistan. Was extraordinarily turbulent, and it was very, very distressful to so many people because everybody was displaced. Now we keep hearing and we read in the news about the refugees from Syria, the refugees from some other parts of the Middle East who are being forced to flee their land because there's extraordinary amount of violence. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is not talking about an unusual topic. The eternal force of time can separate family members, can separate livelihoods, can separate wealth, practically displacing and showing the world that it can happen to anybody, it can happen in any part of the world, and such things have happened over and over again, and it is not to be seen as unusual. So whoever is under the influence of Supreme Kala must surrender his most dear life, and what to speak of other things such as wealth, honor, children, land, and home. Fact. And this is 5,000 years when Srimad Bhagavatam is being written. Even at that time, the cycles of time, they keep repeating themselves. It's just a repetition, of history. There's nothing new. That's the reason why it's so important for us to have a good understanding of history to some extent, because history does repeat itself in many cases. If not in the same form, it does repeat itself in essence. Pitra Bhratr Suhurta Putran Hatasta Vigatam Vayam Atma Chajaraya Grastahat Parage Ham Upasase. Your father, brother, well-wishers, and sons are all dead and passed away. You yourself have expended the major portion of your life. Your body is now overtaken by invalidity, and you're living in the home of another. Dhritarashtra has lost his house because he's lost his children, he has lost everybody, and he's living in the house of uh, Yudhishthira. He doesn't have any rights there anymore. This is being spoken very clearly by Sri Vidura. Andaha puraiva vadiro mandaprajnascha sampratam vishirnadanto mandagnihi sharag saragah kapam udvahan. You have been blind from your very birth, and recently you have become hard of hearing. Your memory is shortened and your intelligence is disturbed. Your teeth are loose, your liver is defective, and you're coughing up mucus. Right? These days, you don't have to be old for all these problems, but he is describing the problems which Sri Dhritarashtra had, where he was suffering from all these issues, and he's just bringing it up, saying your body is invalid, you're living in the house of other, which means that you are under someone else's mercy, which is completely incompatible for a Kshatriya. They cannot be, they don't like to live under the mercy of others. They would rather die than to live in such dishonor. So he's reminding him of his varna, he's reminding him of his calamity, he's reminding him of his bodily condition, practically telling him that the time is near. Aho mahiyasi jantor jivitasha yatha bhavan bhima pavarjatam pindam adatte grahapalavat. Alas, how powerful are the hopes of a living being to continue his life. Verily, you are living just like a household dog and are eating remnants of food given by Bhima. This is a real, this is like a death blow when we start talking about arguments, right? This is like one of the heaviest blows to call his older brother a dog. He's saying you're living like a dog, a household dog. We say faltu kutta or whatever, like your, what do you call it, a household dog. In Sanskrit, they say grahapalavat, domesticated animal. You're living like a domesticated animal where you're eating the remnants thrown by Bhima. He's specifically using the name of Bhima to really awaken Dhritarashtra, because Dhritarashtra had a tremendous amount of animosity towards Bhima, because Bhima practically was responsible for the annihilation of most of the sons of Dhritarashtra, and importantly, for the annihilation of his dearest favorite son, Duryodhana, and the other, which is Dushasana. And both of their deaths were extraordinarily violent. And Bhima was, actually, he was a subject to great anger by Dhritarashtra. So now Vidura is reminding him, saying, you were so angry, he is the one who killed your sons. Now you are living like a domesticated animal, which is living on the remnants thrown by the owner of the house. And that owner here is Bhima. Are you not ashamed? He's practically asking his older brother this question. Why is it that someone who is so balanced and who has such extraordinary skills like Vidura, who is such a diplomat in real sense, where he is constantly careful about what he speaks and what he doesn't speak, he is very sensitive about the feelings of others. Why is it that he is bringing up this topic where he is practically calling his older brother a dog or an animal, and domestic animal? He is also insulting him. It's because he is trying to drive home a point so that the intellect cannot really interfere. The intellect cannot interfere. You see, he is practically not allowing the intellect to interfere in any manner, where there can be arguments, there can be, if you soft nature and soft pedal and certain issues which are very critical, it can cause greater harm than being able to be as direct as possible in being able to bring up. It is not that Dhritarashtra did not know all of this. Dhritarashtra was fully cognizant of the fact that he was under the mercy of the Pandavas. He was cognizant of the fact that he was under the mercy of Bhima. He was eating this and all. He was completely aware. But the attachment which he had to the palace and the attachment that he had to be a part of the royal family was enormous, to such an extent that all these insults were covered by that attachment. Now, Sri Vidura is expanding, magnifying all the defects of living in such a condition so that that particular situation can practically overcome the attachment. He is practically helping him overcome the attachment. It is as much as, for instance, when we touch something which is extraordinarily hot, we overcome the tendency to touch it. In other words, we don't commit the mistake. Right? Children, for example, some children learn better when they come in touch with fire. When they touch fire by accident, and then they suddenly realize that, okay, this is heat, this is fire, we should be cautious. So sometimes an experience itself is required, a very deep experience is required, and that particular attachment to unwanted activities is given up when we are reminded of the negatives. And here, Vidura is just playing an extraordinary role. He's clearing out all the nonsense which is there, and he's getting to the point. Agnir nishtristo dattascha garodarascha dusitaha kritam chetram danamesham taddatter asubihikiyat. There is no need to live a degraded life and subsist on the charity of those whom you tried to kill by arson and poisoning. You also insulted one of their wives and usurped their kingdom and wealth. You see, you also committed such atrocities on them. Are you not ashamed to be living under their protection now? Because you didn't do your job when you were supposed to protect them as children. Tasyapi tava dehoyam kripanasya jigvigasoho pare iti anichatto jirno jaraya vasasiva. Despite your unwillingness to die and your desire to live, even at the cost of honor and prestige, your miserly body will certainly dwindle and deteriorate like an old garment. Krishna uses a similar technology, a similar technique of arguments and counter-arguments to bring Arjuna back to normal. In the second chapter, you notice Krishna calling him, where did this weakness come from? What kind of foolish argument is this? So that kind of an argument is being used here to practically make it sting. And the reason why it is necessary for that sting is that sting in itself is supposed to produce action. Gataswartam imam deham virakto mukta bandanaha avigyata gatir jahyat savaidira udahritaha. He is called undisturbed who goes to an unknown remote place and freed from all obligations quits his material body when it has become useless. Dhira. Now the definition of Dhira is coming. He is called undisturbed who goes to an unknown remote place and freed from all obligations quits his material body when it has become useless. Yahaswakat parato veha jata nirvedatmavan hridi kritva harim gehat pravarjet sanarottamaha. He is certainly a first-class man who awakens and understands either by himself or from others the falsity and misery of this material world, and thus leaves home and depends fully on the personality of Godhead residing within his heart. This is actually a very critical verse in this chapter. Text 27, verse 27. Yahaswakat parato veha jata nirveda atmavan hridikritva harim gehat pravarjetsa narottamaha. So he is certainly a first-class man, narottamaha, nara uttamaha, who awakens and understands either by himself or from others the falsity and misery of the material world, and thus leaves home and depends fully on the personality of Godhead residing within his heart. In this case, Srila Prabhupada, in the purport, is giving three statements of the definition of Dhira. Okay? The first definition is transcendentalist. The Dhira, or the one who is not disturbed by being away from family association. There are three classes of transcendentalists. The Dhira, or one who is not disturbed by being away from family association. Number two, one in the renounced order of life, a sannyasi, by frustrated sentiment. Number three, a sincere devotee of the Lord who awakens God consciousness by hearing and chanting and leaves home depending completely on the personality of Godhead who resides in his heart. Okay? These are three different definitions of a transcendentalist. Three different transcendentalists who are given. is someone who is not disturbed by being away. That is one class of a person. He's just not disturbed. There's really absolutely no need for him to be even in any ashram or anything. He's not disturbed. The second is he takes up a sannyas ashram, and that is taken up because he's frustrated, due to frustrated sentiment. In the sense that he's frustrated by material life. Material frustration pushes him to take up renunciation. So due to frustrated sentiment. And then the third is a sincere devotee who awakens God consciousness by hearing and chanting and leaves home depending completely on the personality of Godhead who resides in his heart. Okay. So here, Srila Prabhupada further mentions, real perfection of the path of liberation is attained when one is practiced to depend fully on the Supreme Personality of Godhead who lives in everyone's heart as Paramatma. Now, this is a critical verse. Why so? Because the Swarup Lakshana of Krishna consciousness, the primary quality of Krishna consciousness, is for us to be able to be completely dependent on Krishna for everything. Internally, there's complete dependence. Externally, one acts according to what is required. There is absolutely no compromise in terms of how one is supposed to act in the external world. You see, we don't really renounce because we don't need to renounce. There's no need. You have to act according to what is required, execute according to what is required. But internally, there is complete dependence on Krishna. This quality of complete dependence is called the primary Lakshana, the Swarup Lakshana of a devotee, Krishna conscious devotee. There could be other characteristics that come about, such as humility, tolerance, so on and so forth. These are called Tatastha Lakshana. These are secondary. These qualities develop because of the primary. It is not that the secondary drives the primary. It is the primary which drives the secondary. So sometimes you may find that a devotee is very fixed in certain ways, but he is yet to develop the quality of humility. He is yet to develop the quality of tolerance and so on and so forth. In other words, you might find that he's a bit harsh, but very regulated in Krishna consciousness, very regulated in sadhana and all that, whatever is to be done. There could be a newcomer who probably is very humble, who is very tolerant, who has not chanted his rounds. He is not even big in a serious focus on sadhana, but he is displaying the secondary qualities of the Tatastha Lakshana. So we go by the primary, we go by the fact that the devotee who is chanting fixed rounds, who is able to do sadhana and who is doing everything in a pakka manner, even though he is harsh or she is harsh and her behavior or his behavior has not really reached the level which is fully appreciated, that particular person, in a matter of time, will develop the Tatastha Lakshana. Okay? The other person who is very simplistic, who has just come into the movement, who is humble and who is, tolerant, has very good qualities which are very, very much appreciated. But we would still have to defer to identifying the Vaishnava through the fixed quality of being able to surrender to the process of Vaidhi Bhakti and to be able to chant on a regular basis and so on, because it's just a matter of time when they will reach that platform. So the Swarup Lakshana of a devotee is complete dependence on Krishna. And that Swarup Lakshana is very rare. It is very rare. Why is it very rare? It is very rare specifically in the Grahasthashram. That is the reason why there's so much discussion on leaving home. There's so much discussion on leaving home. There's so much discussion on, not being attached to relatives. And this whole definition of dhira is being brought about in terms of attachment to relatives and being able to leave home, because dependence on the Supreme Lord, complete dependence, is normally easily achieved when one is moving away from certain established practices of being able to maintain the body. So while being with the family, while being in the world, it is very difficult for one to develop or at least experience this complete dependence. Grahasthas normally experience complete dependence when they are in a crisis. So when they fall into a crisis, it is only then that there is this whole concept of I'm dependent on Krishna, which can come up. It's difficult for those in the Grahasthashram for them to ultimately, even whilst they lead their normal lives, to develop this consciousness of complete dependence, because the external conditions and the rules and regulations of Grahasthashram are such that it forces the person to constantly make arrangements for the future. So there's always this concept of I'm saving money for the future, I'm saving for this, I'm saving for that. I'll have to ensure that all facilities have to be made, and so on. All of this is a part of the Grahasthashram. So in that sense, it is very difficult for one in the Grahasthashram to internally develop the quality of complete dependence. Okay? But someone who is completely dependent on Krishna internally, but externally is able to make all these arrangements, is a wonderful personality. That is a dhira. And that quality can come about if one is able to fix themselves in hearing and chanting. If one is able to fix themselves in hearing and chanting, then automatically they have the ability to develop this dependence on Krishna. Just as much as in Vraja, when you look at Vrindavan, you look at all the pastimes that have occurred in Vraja, we will find that the devotees are being thrown into such calamitous situations. So they are constantly meditating on Krishna when everything is going on well. So nobody, be it the elders, be it the youngsters, the servants, the animals in Vraja, everybody is 100% absorbed in Krishna consciousness. They have absolutely nothing else in mind. So for them, a time of crisis is also complete absorption. At the time of no crisis, regular activity is also complete absorption. So in a similar fashion, when one is practicing Vaidhi Bhakti initially, and when we take up Krishna consciousness and we begin chanting with deep attachment, and we develop our chanting and our hearing process and our reading and so on to such an extent that we become completely absorbed, then we develop the primary lakshana, the Swarup lakshana of complete dependence. It will develop internally. Why so? Because by chanting and hearing, we are becoming Krishna conscious. We are becoming residents of Vraja. By becoming and identifying with the residents of Vraja and developing our own knowledge of who we are in Vraja, we also develop the sentiment of complete dependence. We in fact become eager to completely depend on Krishna. Externally, there could be activity, but internally, there's so much dependence on Krishna, complete dependence, absorption. But technically, in some situations, the external activity helps. And that is the point here which is being made, that one has to be dhira, one has to be fixed, and one has to move away for them to experience this idea of being able to focus on transcendental life instead of being dragged into day-to-day activity. At some point, one needs to be able to relinquish the day-to-day activity and be able to move into deeper absorption into the holy names. That is the thrust here. How to apply it? You apply it, I apply it by chanting and hearing. The deeper our absorption in chanting, the greater would be our internal dependence on the Supreme Lord. Okay? The greater would be the dependence. So that is what we ought to be doing. That is the message which is being given here, is that our own concept of becoming dhira and becoming fixed is dependent on being able to hear and to be able to chant. Okay? In the Bhagavad Gita, the same concept is being explained. What is the pre-qualification which allows one to be able to hear and chant? The pre-qualification is being given in the Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter, chapter 7, verse 28. Yesham tvantagatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvandva moha nirmukta bhajante mam dridhavrataha. Translation: persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life, and whose sinful reactions are completely eradicated, are freed from the dualities of delusion, and they engage themselves in my service with determination. Dridhavrataha, dhira. Dridhavrataha, determination. This dridhavrata of determination to be fixed in Krishna consciousness, determination in sadhana, is a matter of as described in the Bhagavad Gita, pious activities. And what does it mean when they say pious activities? It practically means that one has to reach the point of unalloyed goodness, highest mode of goodness, where they're completely free from the effects of passion and ignorance, which is practically completely free from the pangs of anxiety, attachment, and fear. They're completely free. And it is because they are in the mode of goodness that they have the ability now to become determined. There is no question of becoming determined in being able to pursue Krishna consciousness, being able to pursue the sadhana that we do, if we are going to be in the lower modes. There is no question. We cannot do so. We cannot. It's not possible. Technically, it's not possible to be fixed. The mind is running. You see, we sit down to chant, and then we become restless. We get up and start walking from one end to the other of the room. And then when we walk, the mind is telling you, you sit down. And then we sit down. Again, this particular thing happens. Get up from here, go there. We notice, when restless animals, they move from one place to the other. Yeah, that's because they are captured by the lower modes. We are captured by the lower modes, then we start responding to stimuli, and that doesn't allow us to become fixed in determination. Our determination, our fixed determination, is not going to occur if you're in the lower modes, and if we are still captured by our previous karmic reactions. So verse 7.28 is what talks about being dhira, being determined, being resolute in the Bhagavad Gita. In this verse, Srila Prabhupada is telling us exactly what is required. The quality that is required is for one to be able to hear and chant. If you're able to hear and chant, then you develop the internal Swarup Lakshana of complete dependence on Krishna. Otherwise, for a Grahastha to develop this internal quality while being fully engaged is very difficult, practically impossible. Why? How will you depend on Krishna when you're engaging in, making all kinds of active arrangements? It's difficult for them to do so. So there is need for being able to develop the identity of being a Vrajavasi. And by being a Vrajavasi, one develops that particular absorption, immaterial of their external action, in terms of complete dependence on Krishna. So that is the thrust of this particular discussion on Vidura, Sri Vidura, practically chastising Dhritarashtra, awakening him so that he could leave. And he is also giving him a description that you have to become fixed. And you cannot become fixed staying in the palace. You cannot become fixed by eating the food given by those whom you have harmed. You cannot become fixed by continuing to have samskaras that you have had for all your years. You cannot become fixed because your body is becoming infirm. Get out of this environment, go to a place where you become dependent on the Lord by constantly getting into circumstances where you're forced to remember the Lord, forced to depend on Him. You will automatically develop the Swarup Lakshana of complete dependence, which is the primary quality required for one to make progress. Then you become dhira. You see? The super soul who is within the heart, Krishna is within the heart. We also read in the previous chapter that even in the womb, Parikshit Maharaj is being protected. So Krishna has complete ability to protect us under all circumstances. And in our case, we do not need to leave home, but we do need to become very fixed in our being able to chant the holy names. That is not going to happen unless we increase the mode of goodness. The mode of goodness is not going to happen unless we closely examine eating, sleeping, mating, defending to ensure that there is adequate amount of sattva. Unless we do that particular inventory taking on a daily basis of whether we can make an improvement in our eating, sleeping, mating, defending, where there's a very high level of the mode of goodness, we would fail because we would constantly be operating at a subpar level. You see, we cannot do that for too long. So that is the whole conclusion of this chapter. The whole topic of dhira, becoming fixed, is dependence on Krishna. In Vrindavan, the sadhus, we call it madhukari. They go from house to house, and they are dependent on the Vrajavasis, and the Vrajavasis are trained to feed the sadhu. They are well trained. They don't feed them leftovers. They make fresh roti. They make fresh sabji, whatever is required, and then they give it to them. So the sadhus know that they have to approach someone. They go and approach, and whatever is being given by the householders at the time of lunch, they accept that one meal, and the rest of the time they're sitting and chanting. Now, this is dependence on Krishna, complete dependence. Because Krishna is making organic arrangements to keep them well fed, to protect their bodies, and so on and so forth. Right? In the Grahasthashram, we don't have such opportunity. How do we develop it in the modern context? We develop it not so much by wanting to run into the forest, because that will not work, especially if you're going to constantly be absorbed in what is happening in the city. What is going to work is for us to arrange our lives and re-examine our eating, sleeping, mating, defending, to increase sattva, and to be able to increase sattva to a point where we are completely free from the influence of the lower modes and we are able to take off. Okay, so we'll stop here. We will continue the remaining verses of the chapter in the subsequent session on Thursday. We'll see if there are any questions, and then we can end the session. I'll wait for any questions if you have any. Those of you who are new or who are participating for the first time, the Q&A can come in by pressing the Q&A tab on the left-hand side. If you move the cursor to the left-hand side of the screen, there will be a choice for Q&A. If you don't see the choice, perhaps it's because you're not logged in. If you approach the Google event after logging into your Gmail, then you would be able to see that. Okay, there's a question. Can you explain how one can continue to tolerate when you're at the same time greedy for progress? How can one continue to tolerate when you are at the same time greedy for progress? Tolerate what? I'm not quite clear. Tolerate, what exactly do you mean by tolerate here when you're greedy for same time greedy for? Can you explain your question a little bit more, please? Oh, okay, I get it. Okay, I get it. So you are asking about how can one continue to tolerate when you're at the same time greedy for progress. Spiritual greed, laulyam, is not what we're talking about when we use the word tolerate. Sahishnuna is tolerating the difficulties that come out of performing one's duties while being in the ashram. While being in the ashram, I understood your question now, just in a moment before I asked you. So while being in the ashram, if one were to go through, while being in the grahasthashram, while being married, while working as a professional, while being subjected to the three different types of klesha, the adhyatmic, adi bhautik, adi daivik klesha, right? So these three different types of afflictions of the material world, when one is subjected to these three types of afflictions, that's where the need for tolerance comes in, right? And there's also a need for tolerance where we tolerate the pangs of the senses when they come in touch with their objects, which are inimical to the progress of devotional service. Right? Tolerance is a matter of being able to withdraw our mind and our intelligence and being able to act upon them away from the senses. We do not really worry about the senses. That is tolerance. So if your question is, how can one continue to tolerate when you're at the same time greedy for progress? We tolerate those material pangs, but being greedy for progress is not a question of wanting to tolerate. You don't need to tolerate. You can push yourself. There is no need for tolerance in that level. We can push ourselves. Intensity is required. If we want to make progress, there has to be intensity. And that intensity, we don't need to tolerate. You see, we will tolerate the difficulties to the body, but we will proceed further with great intensity. So that's what that is all about. So we don't tolerate the burning desire. We act upon it. The burning desire, we act upon it by becoming even more fixed, by ensuring that we are able to go many, many miles ahead and we are able to complete the journey in this lifetime. Srila Prabhupada has given us all that is required for us to complete the journey in this lifetime. There is absolutely no need to think that this lifetime is preparatory or this lifetime is the beginning. This lifetime can very well be the lifetime for us to go back. That should be the attitude. And then there is this lack of tolerance for lack of progress. Oh, let me just work on myself. Let me make improvements on a day-to-day basis. We don't tolerate. We make improvements on a day-to-day basis. We want to continuously progress, and we want to constantly see ways to improve. Okay? So we don't tolerate that. We tolerate the pangs of material energy. We understand that we are in a material energy, and we tolerate that. We still perform our duties, and at the same time, we develop this very big desire for us to be able to make progress. Is there any other question that I can hopefully assist with? Hare Krishna. Okay, I don't see any other question. If there are other questions, feel free to drop me a note or write beneath the class in Google, and I will surely make an attempt to answer. Or you can go to sandhini.com and through that understand how to become a member on Facebook, sandhini.com. By doing so, Facebook has a page, sandhini.com. You can search for it. And if you're not already a member, become a member. And that will also be a good place for us to share. In other words, you can ask questions if you have any. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.